Maxxxine was written and directed by Ty West and stars Mia Goth and a huge ensemble cast in the closing part of what I guess has been deemed as the X trilogy. This review will have some spoilers, but before we crack on with that, I'm absolutely not disappointed with this film, which I'm so pleased about. I think I've really enjoyed this trilogy, and yeah, if you don't want to hear spoilers, then I would definitely recommend it, but we'll obviously crack on with some more details. I think it's worth mentioning, I actually wasn't that taken with X when I first saw it. It's a really weird journey I've been on with this kind of franchise, and I went to the cinema and saw X and kind of came away like, yeah, it was fine. And then for whatever reason, I thought, well, I need to see Pearl just to see how it pans out. And it really made me love X. I went back to it, having watched Pearl with my partner and then making him kind of watch that part with me. And yeah, it really hooked me in to the point where we kind of found Maxxxine was coming out about a year ago. We've just been waiting desperately for it to come out. So I'm pleased to say we really enjoyed it. And yeah, I would say it's not a perfect film. Pearl for me I think was pretty flawless actually, and there are some issues I think with Maxxxine, but it's next level for me. I think we've had such a bad year for horror so far in 2024. There's been a lot of really average stuff, and I'm pretty charitable. I've given some films some I think okay scores for what they are. This really is just top quality, and yeah, let's talk about it. So for those of you unfamiliar with the trilogy, please go and watch it. But just as a bit of a quick synopsis, in 1980s Hollywood, adult film star and aspiring actress Maxxxine Minx finally gets her big break. However, as a mysterious killer stalks the starlets of Los Angeles, a trail of blood threatens to reveal her sinister past. I was really lucky actually. I went actually to an early preview of Maxxxine tonight at the Picture House in central London, and Ty West was actually there doing a Q&A, which was pretty awesome. I will talk about some of the things we learned in that QA as we go. On the way back from tonight's screening, I read through some reviews just to get a sense of where people are at with it. And actually, yeah, I get it. There's some crossover with some of my thoughts. What I would say is one of the reviews described the film as just being horribly watchable, and it just absolutely is. It's just got a great style to it, a great soundtrack. The cast is awesome, and Mia Goth, I think you can't beat her at the moment. I mean, she is just so magnetic on screen. Thankfully, I mean, you're with Maxxxine pretty much for like 95% of this film, and it actually absolutely pays off because she's just very, very watchable, very, very likable. And it's weird because Maxxxine isn't necessarily someone that generates a lot of warmth, but you get a lot of empathy from her. You kind of, I don't know, I'm fully supportive of her journey and her desire for success. I will say Elizabeth Debicki, I think, really does also kind of vie for the audience's attention as Elizabeth Bender, the director of the horror film that Maxxxine is starring in, and you can really sort of slugging it out for attention when they're on screen. Obviously, the trilogy, that the appeal of the X trilogy is the difference between the movies, and that's something I've really loved about it is how distinct each one of them is. X was more that sort of Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of grimy, grungy, like slasher movie from the 70s. Pearl, whatever the fuck that was kind of just this Technicolor nightmare, like a Disney film on acid. Maxxxine is pretty much an old-fashioned Giallo film. It's very reminiscent of kind of those kind of Italian slashers you got from the 70s. And it's that iconography of black leather gloves and face slashes and really bloody gory deaths, and you don't get a lot of Giallos these days. And I loved that. I think it was really kind of cool to see that kind of filmmaking back, and to see that in that like really cool 80s LA setting. I thought just gave it a really cool dimension. I think in terms of negatives, there's just a couple of bits that I think we should talk about. I have alluded to it already, but I think a lot of the critics would agree that the ending is maybe not as strong as it could have been. And I don't mean the very end. I actually really liked kind of how it played out, and that final scene, me and my partner just turned and grinned at each other because it was just glorious the way that the soundtrack kicks in, and it's that last sort of 5 or 10 minutes I thought was really good. I think where a lot of horror films will have their kind of big climax where the denouement comes. I felt like it was a little rushed, and again I've seen other reviews kind of say the same thing, that the ending almost felt like it wasn't deserving of the film that preceded it, because it was so tightly directed and scripted in that first sort of hour and a half, and then there comes a point where it kind of the big kind of denouement happens, the big kind of climax happens, and it didn't feel that satisfying. And I felt like Maxxxine was quite disempowered, and it took her out of it. It sort of took her moment away a little bit, and it was quite easily resolved. And I don't know, I wonder whether something was cut out or whether something could have been in that place. It didn't feel particularly exciting or original in terms of where the story was going, and it felt again like we'd missed something or something had been cut out. It wasn't bad, it wasn't a bad ending, and it did give a bit of kind of closure to that whole trilogy. I just feel like it rushed to it. Sometimes when you're at school and you're a kid and you're writing a story and then you just don't know how to finish it, so you kind of just make up an ending, and that's kind of where it goes. So I thought that was probably the weakest part of the film. Again, didn't detract from me, and I think once I will sort of sit back and absorb the film, because I only sort of came home an hour ago and I've only just seen it. Who knows? Who knows if there was a better way of ending it? But I did love that Maxxxine kind of got her happy ending, and I know from the Q&A that was something that Ty West talked about, that he actually just likes the character, and I think to have had a slightly different ending that maybe wasn't as slightly cookie cutter-ish, I think we would probably all have felt that we wanted more for the Maxxxine character, but maybe in some way it sort of detracted from the excitement of the film, because we wanted that to be, her narrative, and it obviously wasn't something more important than that. That said, I think this has just been a great trilogy, such a quirk of filmmaking, the whole story about Ty West being stuck in New Zealand after they made X and thinking, hey, sod it, let's just make Pearl, we've got sets, we've got actors, and the fact that we got then to conclude this in a much bigger setting out of that farmstead into the big city of Los Angeles in the 80s, I just thought was such a great change of pace. And again, what I love about the trilogy is just how unique each film is. You don't really need to have seen any of the preceding movies to enjoy any of them in isolation. They all work as themselves. But I just think as a trilogy, it's such a treat for horror fans. It's one of those ones that I don't really buy physical media anymore, but I want that box set and I want to own it. And I just think we don't get that very often. One of the issues I have with kind of any kind of trilogies or long-running TV shows is that sense of things being made up as they go and things being kind of made up on the spot. And, even you think about the David Gordon Green Halloween sort of trilogy, that was planned, that was announced, they kind of had money for it. It was a big sort of more top budget kind of Hollywood horror, and yet even that didn't feel coherent in the way that it came together as a trilogy. It felt like they were making it up on the fly, and I think Ty West knew these characters a lot better, so although he hadn't planned to make it as a trilogy, it hangs together in such a more coherent way that you feel like it was intentional, and that story played out in the way that it was always going to play out when he sort of started writing the script to X. So I just think we need to appreciate that, because in the modern studio system, that just doesn't happen very often. And you don't get someone in Ty West's position being able to control what his film ends up being and what that trilogy ends up looking like. So I just think it's worth calling that out. And just one more thing on that sort of trilogy thing is, I think because we've had such a little amount of time between X and Maxxxine coming out, there's been none of that bullshit fan service that builds up over time with kind of trilogies, especially with remakes. And obviously, there hasn't been much time that's passed, but I really am sick of those callbacks and that fan service. Each of these films does its own thing. It doesn't trade on the film before it. It has its own identity, its own kind of style, and it doesn't necessarily need the viewer to have loved the other ones. And what I liked, there was a question tonight in the Q&A about which of these films is Ty West's favourite, and obviously he couldn't answer, but his answer was very much like, it depends on the day, depends on how he's feeling. At the moment he loves Maxxxine, but he may go back in time and love one more than the other one. But it just isn't like that, because you're not forced to choose. They are all their own individual entities. So I could go on about this film a lot, but I will like to try and keep this to a short amount of time as possible. I would really recommend Maxxxine. It's one of those films that will probably be one of those kind of future classics for me. It's a solid 9, which again I know that's a high for a kind of more recent horror film, but I really think it's worth it. And I'm not going to get into comparisons with Pearl and X. I think over time, as Ty West said, you'll kind of develop your own favourites and have different wants and needs, and depends what you fancy watching at the time. So do go check out Maxxxine. It's really, really good. It's really fun. It's a blast. It's gory. It's kind of got some really, really kind of nice graphic deaths in there, but it's got a bit of a heart to it and a bit of a sense of humour. So enjoy Maxxxine. We really did. And thanks for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.